My name is Bruce Wolfe and this is Eric Griswold. In fact, this may be the smallest project you'll see in the whole of the festival. It's not a small project, but you know, there are some ideas that you have and you think later, I should have really done something about that. And there are all sorts of facts and you think you might remember them, but you don't. So a remembered fact that there were more pianos per person in Australia than anywhere else in the world. And the idea, the piano mill, a sizable idea that has come to life as a tantalisingly small work of architecture. Eric is a composer for prepared piano. So tinkering with pianos, making the sound more percussive and changing the tonality. My mind turns to the thousands of pianos in outback Australia, just aging away and pre-preparing themselves. So why don't we gather loads of pianos in that pre-prepared condition, and you, Eric, compose for them. Now, they could just be in a room, or we could build a tower. We could build a tower with operable vents, winches and pulleys, sonic periscopes, tuned grater blades, but we need pianos, lots of pianos. Yet first the site. Environment was to play a large part in this venture, a balance of context and purpose. So pianos started accumulating on the property. Throughout the bush, these remote pianos gave Eric a chance to get to know the build-up of his mega instrument, get to know their foibles and their unique qualities. Importantly, all of these were as-found pianos, certainly no longer new. Yet the pianos were all treasures in their own way, some beautiful works of art, now about to have a new purpose. The unique building blocks of the piano mill. It was a building site for just a couple of months. Construction was designed around simplicity, available equipment. The building process was more chainsaw and tractor technology. Yet the finished building has the feeling of a jewellery box. And then there's the pianos, the real jewels. The building blocks so fully integral with the architecture, yet also part of the construction methodology. Now, you don't often get this chance to be project instigator, but also piano collector, tractor driver, builder, musical collaborator, as well as architect. But in the end, it's the building that conveys not only a sense of why, but of how. You can see that in this case, design is clearly informed by process. And okay, this part wasn't so easy, and I couldn't find it in the piano mill manual. But you grab a piano in the tractor, you lower it onto this runway, you roll it in underneath the building and then winch it up through the hole on a waiting hook. Felt like many more decisions per square metre than any other project that I'd worked on. But after all, it is a fairly small project. Pianos just fitting through this hole. We had collected the pianos first, so we knew about their size and condition. A temporary bridge put in place to roll them off, and a bit of agility to get them onto the sides. And here we have Eric inspecting the mill. It gives a good feel for the interior of the instrument or building, looking up through the void. This machine, the mill, it's also performance stage and sound studio, and home for those 16 pre-prepared pianos. The architecture is kept simple, a near cubic volume, perched on 4 stout ironbark legs. A clear story. Those operable sound vents that I mentioned, by day, sort of silent edifice, the copper cladding evolving from that shiny state of new down to a beautiful patina. Both timber and copper are now weathering nicely as it settles into the forest. Just one more element in the bush. Architecture is symbolic in its function. By night it's full of drama. Here, the night before the performance, the dress rehearsal, that dress rehearsal joining the other sounds of the night. Equipment and people, a strangely large number of people to work with in that 4.5 metre cube. Pianists, harpists, percussionists, sound artists, movement artists, and a sound recordist. It's about 2 square metres per person, including the void and including the pianos. This is a building revealing its purpose, nestled into the forest. The performance starting at dusk. The dancer is winched down. You hear the winch grinding away and then the dancer emerges under the spotlight. This creature of the mill opens the shutters with those large levers on the side and directs out the sonic periscopes. It's an architecture totally bound by its use. Projecting back onto itself The audience experiences the activity inside the mill. The wall becomes a translucent film. People also were encouraged to walk around the mill and experience the sounds from various locations. So theatre and drama was always part of the piano mill concept, and here the dancer awakens the instrument. But perhaps what is most important in this building is a unique relationship between fabric and purpose. Eric.
And now to take the building for a musical test drive. Turn the volume up to 11 and see what it can do. What happens if all 16 pianists drum roll on the black keys as loud as possible? What if all the 16 pianos, each with its own distinct character, timbre, and some very questionable variations in tuning, played the same slowly moving arpeggio? A very unique sound, like a swarm of bees, I think. To show off the vintage pianos with all of their bung notes, wonky keys, and off-kilter sounds, why not try a honky-tonk blues, inspired by American experimental composer Conrad Gargett? And given this wonderful collection of antique pianos with roots in Germany, England, and France, who could resist an homage to Beethoven, Chopin, and Debussy? In the premiere performance, Claire de Lune was accompanied by Mother Nature herself, who provided thunderclaps and the gentle patter of rain on the mill's rooftop. Of course, the giant grater blade chimes hanging from the mill's rafters are used to herald the building's launch and to create climactic effect at the golden section of the musical composition. The sounds of nature spill into the piano mill. The pianists sit among the trees, in a dialogue with the birds and other forest animals. In quiet passages of the piece, the audience hears a blend of insects, frogs, low chords, and environmental sound. Since the piano mill was created and launched, a very warm community of pianists, composers, and supporters has developed around it. Already, we've had 5 new composers create their own works, inspired by everything from machine rhythms, Australian folk songs, bird song, the architecture, and the pianos themselves. Bruce?
And the mill has started to become a hub for other experimental musicians, wanting to explore music, environment, architecture, and Australian cultural history. Whether instrument or architecture, it has spawned new compositions for a unique thing, a piano mill. This has become a feature in the region's cultural landscape, and involvement has always been fundamental to this concept. The instrument, full of musicians, audience had to feel engaged. With all of us on the outside, images of the inside were simultaneously projected onto us. All audience members were therefore given these white umbrellas to become part of a large pixelated screen with 2 projectors and about 1 octave per umbrella. The piano mill has been described as an unusual building, an oversized musical instrument or somewhat Gothic tower. For me, it's really just a fanciful idea that has come to life in the Australian forest. But perhaps the piano mill is more than a building or an idea. For many, it represents the intersection of architecture and arts, community and environment. People, musicians, exploring creative ideas through environment. And finally, I would like to thank all of those that have made the project live, from the composer to the builder, to all of those musicians, and above all, the supportive client. But to end on a quote, simply outrageous that a piece of architecture should win the National Award for Experimental Music. And now, quite amazing that this minute building has won its category in the World Architecture Festival. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I could see some puzzled looks on the faces.
Well, if I may, I have a question indeed already, because this piano mill seems to be an instrument in itself. So how do you create a building that is at the same time an instrument?
Yeah, this is true. The fabric of the skin of the building is a membrane. It's plywood and copper membrane. So it was important for us to be able to augment the sounds, either have the mill closed with the vents closed, but still get that music through the skin of the instrument. But then amplitude given by the opening of the vents, and in fact there are two sonic periscopes there. They're a bit like those tubes that you yell, all ahead full, but they're over the two instruments that are more or less in tune both within themselves and with each other. And those two vents that you may have seen come back into large copper bells at the bottom. So people, as they move around the instrument, can experience the sound in a lot of different ways and look up into the musical instrument as well. So yes, it is a musical instrument and has been treated in that way.
Leslie?
I have a question. I mean, I don't remember who said it, but architecture is often at its most powerful when we don't know how to occupy it. And there's part of this project, which I think is incredibly beautiful, very poetic, that has the appearance of a garden shed, but at the same time, a kind of almost low-tech technology. How did you come to the form of it, particularly the roof? I'm kind of curious.
Okay, so we wanted to get natural light into the building, so the roof is actually lifted off the main body of the structure, and there's a clerestory around that. The building too had to be built in this remote location by me and some mates with a tractor, and so there is a certain agricultural feel to the building. But because of the precious nature of those pianos, with all of their history, we wanted the inside to have that richness. So you'll see the rich timber inside. The copper outside is very much designed to weather naturally with the bush. So where it's situated is, if you like, in a little dell. So we cut down a few trees to make this area in the middle. The timber for some of the building is from those logs that were milled locally and repurposed into the building. So yes, I can understand why you see it's got that kind of shed-like feel, because it is, if you like, an agricultural building, and yet there's a precision about the inside that makes it very, very jewel-like.
Unusual.
Yes.
Frederick?
I will ask three questions very briefly.
Briefly.
Do all the instruments synchronize? I mean, do they all play the same tune at the same time, or do they play differently?
Look, the composers who have written for it have all taken their own approach. One composer actually transcribed the rhythms of machines and old mills, and then we recreated that inside the building. So that was very precise. However, in my composition, I've taken the approach of creating texture, creating sound texture. So each of the pianists plays in their own time, and then together they produce a kind of mass effect.
Can you listen, the people sitting outside, does the sound filter clearly enough so that they can listen, although I suppose they're not supported by electrical help, no?
To me, that's one of the really unique things about the building is that Bruce was really conceiving of the sound in the total conception of the design. So actually the materials that he's used for the walls project the sound very clearly. And I was really surprised the first time I heard it, that there's very little filtering of the high frequencies. So you really feel like you're standing behind the piano. Also, I think what's really successful is the conception of the sound footprint, if you like, in this environment, so that actually the level, the volume of the sound really blends with the landscape of the forest.
And one last brief thing. I think the amazing thing about the building is that you really built an architectural instrument, a musical instrument. but it doesn't look like one. It looks like a very conventional, geometric, vertical structure. Why was that?
The geometry of the building is very simple to explain. It's the length of 2 pianos wide. So the footprint was the most convenient way to get the highest density of instruments in place. So each floor has got 8 pianos, 2 per wall, in just enough room for, to join at the corners, but also enough room for the pianist to sit at the piano and not fall down the hole that is the size of the actual piano coming up. So the instrument itself is a product of those pianos, and the density that we wanted to achieve, not only to make it into as tight an instrument as possible, but so the musicians within that instrument could relate to each other, because it is absolutely unique that 16 pianists get to play with each other. It's usually just one or maybe two.
I love the concept, overall concept about the morphology and the operation. But my question is, it's all directional, it's the same thing, right? Wouldn't that be even more interesting if you show up one section to show whatever happens inside to the audience from one direction? So probably the quality of the sound will be more directional?
Yeah, we're in the middle of the forest there, so there is no perceivable difference in the light texture coming through the trees. But I take your point about being able to display the pianist to the outside. One issue we had with that, obviously, is safety, having to contain the instrument. But the other, and we do have opening portions on it, but one of the things that came to me very early on was that idea of electronically projecting what was happening on the inside to the audience, because as an instrument with all the musicians on the inside, we did want to have that engagement. So with the 3 projectors, one back onto the instrument as though the instrument in fact fades away through projecting back onto the skin, and the other 2 projecting onto this sea of white umbrellas to give these individual keyboards being played simultaneously, and one side of the audience could look across to the other and see that connection.
Well, thank you very much. It's certainly a pity that we can't judge on site in this case.
Come on over.
I'm sorry, we have to end. We're all invited. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your presentation.
Fantastic.
Answers. Thank you.